Hypervigilance. There is something your body knows that your mind has not yet fully accepted. It lives in the tightness that gathers between your shoulder blades for no visible reason, in the way your breath grows shallow when someone's voice rises, even slightly, even in laughter, in the vigilance that never quite powers down. Not in the middle of a quiet evening, not in a relationship where you are genuinely safe, not even in the rare soft moments when every external circumstance is telling you that everything is fine. Everything is fine, and yet some deep register of your physiology refuses to believe it. You have likely explained this away in various forms over the years. You call it anxiety, you call it overthinking. You tell yourself you are a worrier by nature, that some people are simply built more sensitive, more reactive, more prone to reading rooms and anticipating disruption. But what if none of those explanations are quite accurate? What if what lives in your body is not a personality trait at all, but a memory? The body remembers what the mind works so hard to organize into something manageable. It remembers not in language, not in the way you would tell a story, but in sensation, in posture, in the precise angle of alertness your jaw holds when the environment feels unpredictable, in the readiness that sits in your chest like a held note, waiting for a resolution that somehow never fully arrives. This is not pathology, it is not weakness. It is, in the most literal sense, loyalty. Your nervous system is loyal to the conditions under which it was first shaped, to the household weather of your early life, to the particular emotional climate that surrounded you when you were too young and too dependent to do anything but adapt to it entirely. And the profound aching truth is this: the storm it is still bracing for may have passed years ago. The household that taught your body to brace may be long behind you. The people, the dynamic, the daily atmosphere of low-level tension or sudden turbulence, they may exist now only in memory. But the body did not get the message. The body is still standing at the window, watching the sky. This is a story about why, and about what it means, slowly, to finally come inside. Grumble. The child who learned to read the weather. Before a child has language for what's happening around them, they have sensation. They have the felt experience of the people they depend on, the emotional temperature of the room, the quality of the silence, the barely perceptible shift in a parent's posture that signals something the child cannot name, but can feel with every nerve in their body. Children are, by biological necessity, exquisite readers of the adults in their world. Their survival depends not just on physical care, but on attunement, on being close enough to the emotional reality of their caregivers to anticipate what is needed, what is coming, and how to remain safe inside of it. This is not learned behavior. It is wired in. But in some homes, that wiring gets stretched into something it was never meant to carry. In some homes, the emotional environment is not stable enough, not predictable enough, not regulate enough to let a child simply be a child, curious, open, occasionally careless. Instead, the child's extraordinary perceptive capacity gets recruited into a different function entirely. It becomes a surveillance system, a storm tracker. Picture the child who wakes each morning and listens before they rise, who reads the sounds from the kitchen, the particular weight of a step, the silence between movements, to determine what kind of day it will be before they have even left their room. Who learns the specific facial expression that means the air has changed and adjusts their behavior accordingly, sometimes before the adult is fully aware that anything has shifted at all. This child is not anxious in the clinical sense, not yet. They are adaptive. They are brilliantly, exhaustingly adaptive. They have learned that the most important skill available to them is the accurate and rapid reading of emotional weather, because being caught off guard, being too loud, too needy, too oblivious, can cost them the warmth, the peace, or the sense of safety they are always quietly working to maintain. And so they become skilled. They become the child who is easy to have around, who seems to understand things beyond their years, who rarely needs to be told twice, who smooths tensions they did not create with a kind of quiet instinctive grace. Adults admire them. Teachers find them mature. The household relies on their steadiness without ever quite acknowledging the enormous invisible weight that steadiness requires. Nobody asks the cost, because from the outside the child seems fine, more than fine. They seem in fact remarkable, but something is being quietly rerouted inside that remarkable child. The energy that could go toward playing, toward dreaming, toward the glorious self-centeredness of childhood is being redirected, constantly, into the monitoring of the surrounding emotional field. And the body, that faithful, recording body, is learning a posture, a way of being in the world that keeps the muscles ready, the senses sharp, and the nervous system perpetually just a little bit on. Hangulras, where love went missing, the skies that never quite cleared, not all difficult homes announce themselves. Some of the most quietly wounding environments in childhood are the ones that, from the outside, look entirely ordinary. There is food on the table. There are people who would use the word love without hesitation. There are birthday parties, school pickups, and moments of genuine tenderness scattered like brief clearings in a long, overcast season. But between those clearings, there is weather. There is the low-pressure system of a parent's unprocessed anger cycling slowly through the household without ever fully making landfall or fully departing. There is the atmosphere of a home organized around the management of one adult's emotional state, where everyone's behavior is quietly calibrated to that one barometer, where the unspoken household rule is, keep it smooth, don't be the thing that tips it. Or there is something perhaps more disorienting still, inconsistency. A parent who is warm and generous and fully present one evening and somewhere else entirely the next morning, not cruel, not dramatic, but simply variable in a way that a child's nervous system can't predict and therefore cannot relax around, because unpredictability is, to the nervous system, a form of danger. The body cannot rest into what it cannot anticipate. And a child who cannot anticipate when the warmth will arrive learns to stay alert, always, against the possibility that it might suddenly withdraw. What goes missing in these homes is not love in any absolute sense. It is steadiness. It is the kind of consistent, regulated emotional presence that communicates to a child's developing nervous system. The ground beneath you is reliable. You do not need to watch it constantly. You are allowed to look up. When that steadiness is absent, when it is replaced by volatility, or by an emotional unavailability that keeps the parent present in body but unreachable in spirit, or by a warmth that is real but conditional on the child's behavior, compliance, or achievement. The child does not conclude that the environment is unreliable. Children do not have that perspective. The child concludes, with the total logic of their developmental stage, that the environment is responding to them, that their needs, their moods, their authentic aliveness are in some way the variable that determines the climate. And this, quietly, becomes a belief carried forward into every room they will ever enter as an adult. The belief that they are, in some fundamental way, responsible for the weather, that their presence causes the pressure to change, that if they can only be careful enough, steady enough, small enough and good enough, the sky might finally, mercifully, clear. Handora. How the mind and body protect itself, a fortress built from feeling. When the emotional environment of childhood is unreliable, the body does not wait for the mind to form a theory about what is happening. The body acts, and the action it takes is ancient, biological, and entirely beyond the child's conscious choosing. The branch of the nervous system responsible for survival responses, the same system that governs the contraction of muscles before impact, the narrowing of focus under perceived threat, begins to operate at a higher baseline, not in the dramatic, all-consuming way of an acute emergency, but in a lower, more sustainable register, a kind of chronic readiness. The body learns to live slightly above its own resting state, the way a house keeps its security system armed even when nothing particular has been reported in the neighborhood. Cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, runs at a modestly elevated level. The muscles of the shoulders, the jaw, the hips hold a subtle contraction that becomes so habitual it no longer registers as tension. It simply registers as normal. The posture of vigilance becomes the only posture the body has ever fully known. And alongside this physiological landscape, something equally important is happening in the mind. The child develops what might be understood as a deeply personal theory of safety. It goes something like this: if I remain alert, if I do not let myself relax, if I keep my attention on the horizon, I will not be caught off guard. I will see the storm before it arrives. And being caught by surprise has always felt, at the level of the body, like the most dangerous thing of all. Shame, too, becomes part of this architecture. Not the clean, corrective shame of having done something specific and wrong, but the ambient shame of simply being, of having needs, of taking up space, of sometimes being oblivious to the emotional weather, and therefore failing in the role of keeper of the peace. This shame is not a moral failing, it is a survival mechanism. If the child can hold themselves responsible for the instability of the environment, they maintain the illusion that they have some control over it. The alternative, that they are small and powerless inside a system that is simply beyond their management, is a terror the psyche of a child simply cannot afford to hold. And so the body and the mind collude in a kind of faithful, costly protection. The nervous system stays armed. The shame keeps the child compliant and vigilant. The attachment style that forms anxious or avoidant, or the particular exhausting combination of both, is not a character flaw. It is the most elegant possible response to an inelegant situation. Honfangrolars, the battle no one sees. Running from rain that has already stopped. The adult who grew up inside the kind of weather described here carries their nervous system's old settings into every new context they inhabit. This is not metaphor, this is neurological. The pathways carved by years of hypervigilance do not simply smooth over when the original conditions change. They remain ready to fire because the body cannot distinguish between the past that shaped them and the present moment that resembles it, even faintly. And so a raised voice in a meeting, not directed at them, not even particularly intense, lands in their body as a signal to contract. A period of silence from someone they love activates a low, insistent alarm that reads, "Something is wrong. Something I did. What did I do?" A relationship that is, by any honest measure, stable and kind still produces a background frequency of waiting, of expecting, somewhere beneath the surface of ordinary days, that the temperature is about to drop. They are exhausted in a way that is difficult to explain. Not because their life is particularly hard, necessarily, but because they are living two timelines simultaneously. They are in the present, functional, responsive, often even contented, while also being, at a deeper level, still back in the room where they learned to brace, still reading the room, still adjusting, still managing the invisible work of keeping themselves safe inside an emotional climate that their nervous system has not yet received the news has changed. The contradictions this produces are genuinely painful. They long for deep rest, but rest feels like dropping their guard, and dropping their guard has always felt like a particular kind of foolishness. They want closeness, but closeness means being fully present in their body, and being fully present in their body means feeling everything, including the old ache that lives there. They want, more than almost anything, to stop being so vigilant. But vigilance has been their most reliable companion for so long that its absence feels less like freedom and more like being unprotected in an open field. This is the invisible battle, not dramatic, not obvious, but bone deep, daily, and profoundly lonely in the way that all invisible things are lonely. Because the person living it often cannot find the language to explain that they are tired, not from what is happening now, but from something that happened a long time ago and has never quite been allowed to finish. Honvangrolars, when the pattern becomes visible, seeing the signal for what it is. There is a particular kind of moment that arrives, for many people, after years of living inside these old patterns without fully recognizing them. It arrives not as a dramatic revelation, but as a small, quiet noticing. A moment in which the body contracts at some ordinary, harmless thing, a tone of voice, a closed door, an unexpected change in plan, and something in the mind pauses just long enough to observe. That response was larger than this situation required. That pause is everything. Not because it immediately changes anything, not because the body suddenly relaxes, or the old wiring rewires itself, or the years of accumulated vigilance dissolve in a single moment of awareness. But because awareness, even fragile and newly formed, is the first condition of any real change. You cannot soften what you cannot see. You cannot comfort what you have never named. And when you begin to see it, when you begin to trace the thread from the way your body contracts in the present to the environment that taught it to contract in the past, something quietly shifts in the nature of your relationship to your own experience. The response is no longer a character flaw to be overcome. It is no longer evidence that you are too sensitive, too reactive, too difficult to be around. It is, instead, a signal from a younger version of yourself who learned something important about survival and never received word that the lesson was no longer required. This is not about assigning blame to the people who shaped your nervous system. Most of them were navigating their own unexamined weather, their own inherited bracing, their own storms that had never been properly tended. Fault is rarely the most useful frame. What is useful is understanding, the kind that is offered not as an intellectual exercise, but as a form of mercy. The mercy of seeing yourself clearly in the full context of how you were shaped and refusing to collapse that complexity into simple self-judgment. When the pattern becomes visible, it becomes workable, not immediately, not without effort, but with a tenderness that was never available to the child who first learned to brace. Because that child had to survive. You, now, have the rare and extraordinary luxury of something more than survival. Handvangrulas. Learning a different tenderness. Telling the body it is safe to come home healing. In this territory is not primarily an intellectual undertaking. You can understand, at a thoroughly cognitive level, that the storm has passed, that the home you grew up in is behind you, that the people who could not regulate their own emotional weather are no longer the air you breathe every day, and still find that your body does not believe a word of it. This is not failure. This is simply the nature of where the wound lives. It lives below language, below narrative, below the part of you that reasons and reflects and produces insight. It lives in the body that braced before you were old enough to form a sentence about why, and it can only be truly reached in the language the body understands: sensation, breath, slowness, and the repeated experience of safety that is allowed to land fully without being preemptively doubted. The work, then, is less about knowing differently and more about feeling differently. In small, patient increments, repeated across time. It begins with the breath, not as a technique, but as a return. The breath that was held slightly shallow for so many years, the chest that learned to keep itself partially closed as protection. These can, with gentleness and repetition, be invited towards something fuller, not forced open, invited. There is a profound difference. Forcing replicates the original conditions. Inviting is the first act of a new relationship with yourself. It continues in the body's posture. The shoulders that carry decades of held readiness can be noticed, without judgment, and softened. Not once, but again and again, as many times as the contraction reasserts itself. Each softening is a conversation with the nervous system, a quiet repetition of the message: you do not need to hold this anymore. The watch is over. And underneath all of it is grief. The grief for the child who deserved a sky that was reliable, who deserved to be so thoroughly held by the steadiness of the adults around them that they never had to become their own storm tracker, who deserved to spend their childhood looking up at the world with curiosity, rather than always scanning the horizon. To grieve what was missing is to finally acknowledge that it mattered, that you mattered, that the child who stood at the window, watching for signs, they deserved to be inside, warm, certain of their safety in the quietly unremarkable way all children simply deserve. You still deserve that. The capacity for that safety has not expired. It is available to you now, one breath at a time, one softened shoulder, One moment of allowed stillness in a sky that right now is clear. The storm that shaped you was real. Your body's response to it was intelligent and faithful and right. And the storm has passed. You are allowed to put down the watch. You are allowed to come inside.